Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The back-to-back incidents of desecration of Holy Quran, first in Sweden and now in Denmark, have angered the Muslims worldwide. And now Pakistan not only condemned such incidents in the strongest possible terms, but has also led the Muslim world from the front in shaking the conscience of the international community and also making them rethink and review the position regarding the freedom of free speech, also the freedom of a right to demonstrate. Earlier, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution on religious hatred, which was presented by Pakistan on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Now we see the United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution by consensus presented by Pakistan titled Promoting Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue and Tolerance in Countering Hate Speech. The resolution has urged the international community to counter all forms and dimensions of hate speech. Now, this resolution has become the first that has been adopted by the United Nations General Assembly to strongly deplore all acts of violence against religious symbols and holy books. Now, Pakistan's mission counselor Bilal Chaudhry expressed profound satisfaction with the adoption of this resolution. We earlier saw also Pope Francis condemning such incidents, saying they have angered and disgusted him. In today's program, we'll be taking up this important matter of the rise of Islamophobia and the kind of role Pakistan is playing in leading the Muslim world from the front in shaking the conscience of the international community. For that, we are honored to have been joined on Skype by Professor Dr. Sarwat Rauf. She's expert foreign affairs. Dr. Sarwat, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. We'll be later on joined by other participants also. Let me begin with you, Dr. Sarwat. Now, the adoption of this resolution by the United Nations General Assembly, how significant a stride do you think it is to make the international community rethink and review its position regarding freedom of expression and the right to demonstrate? Dr. Sarwat, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Unfortunately, we can't hear you properly. I guess there is some sort of distortion. We'll try to reconnect to you. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Ms. Nyla Chohan. She's former ambassador. Ms. Naela, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight to talk about this very important issue. Now, the adoption of this resolution presented by Pakistan at the United Nations General Assembly, how significant a stride do you think it is when it comes to the effort of the Muslims in making the international community rethink and review its position regarding freedom of expression and the right to demonstrate?
I think it's a very important step. Until now, the West was brushing it aside, and this pretext of freedom of expression was being abused. Muslims are not against freedom of expression. Islam believes in freedom of expression, but we do not believe in hatred against any religion, any faith, and any discrimination. And that's why Pakistan was one of the initiators of this resolution. But having said that, the world has to understand that this resolution is very important. Even if there were certain countries that had expressed their reservations, now that it has been adopted by consensus, it is their legal international obligation to ensure that no such hate crimes are committed in their countries.
Right. Let me go back to Dr. Sarwat. Dr. Sarwat, what's your understanding of the adoption of this resolution, especially making the international community rethink its position on freedom of expression as well as the right to demonstrate? Dr. Sarwat, unfortunately, we can't hear you. We'll try to reconnect to you once again. Now, how do you see Pakistan's role, Ms. Naela, when it comes to Pakistan's leading from the front? Earlier we saw the United Nations Human Rights Council also adopting a resolution on religious hatred, and now this particular resolution was also presented by Pakistan.
I take it as very positive, very important, and very constructive. And that's why this resolution got all the support, and it was adopted not only in UN but also, as you said, in Geneva, in Human Rights Council. A similar resolution was also adopted, because now the world has to understand that for peace it is important that we respect all faiths, all holy symbols, and all religious beliefs. And this is a basic essence of tolerance. If we consider ourselves as civilized human beings, then tolerance and respect for others is imperative.
So adoption of this resolution by consensus, what does that mean?
That means that even when there were countries that had reservations, which did abstain or did explain their vote, the point is that they all accepted the importance of it, and that's why it was adopted by consensus. That is the significance, that all the countries, all the members, whether they had explanation of their vote subsequently, did accept this resolution as an important resolution and adopted it.
So what does it show about those who went against it? Do we understand there is lack of unanimity when it comes to ensuring interreligious, intercultural harmony around the world?
Yes. I mean, you look at India. India was one country that was against this resolution. And obviously what you see in India is really lamentable, how minorities are being abused and humiliated. So obviously India had reservations because they have an Hindutva agenda. Similarly, you have seen in Sweden, because there are certain political parties which are extreme right-wing, and their vote bank is extreme right-wing, and therefore to cater to their vote bank, they commit such unfortunate activities which are not to the benefit of image of Sweden also.
So when we talk about the approach of the governments there in Sweden and Denmark, although we have seen the statements coming from the leadership deploring such type of acts, but also say that they can't stop it happening under the garb of freedom of expression. Your understanding regarding that, what does that show about their approach to this issue?
Basically, the problem is that there is a lot of pretext being used, and they are not really taking it very seriously. The Western world has been in the last 2 centuries using human rights and freedom of expression as an instrument to humiliate others. And now what goes around comes around, so it has come to their doors, and they don't know how to justify it. So that's why they are still harping on the same expression, that freedom of expression is their basic right. This resolution is not against freedom of expression. It is basically freedom of expression of everyone, and to be given the same respect as everyone, as equal citizens. So that is the important part, and that's what needs to be understood, and that's what OIC is doing. And Pakistan, when we were chairing it in 2021, we did that, and we have, alhamdulillah, been successful.
Right, we are joined by another participant on the phone line by Mr. Irfan, Ghauri, senior journalist. Mr. Ghauri, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, Pakistan had been leading the Muslim world from the front in order to shake the conscience of the international community regarding a rise of Islamophobia and the kind of back-to-back incidents we have seen happening first in Sweden and then now in Denmark. What's your understanding? How do you look at the efforts done by Pakistan in leading the Muslim world from the front? First, we saw the United Nations Human Rights Council adopting a resolution presented by Pakistan on behalf of the OIC, and now the United Nations General Assembly has also adopted a resolution regarding this.
Thank you, Jawad. Am I audible?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Jawad, to carry forward what the other participant was saying, there are two aspects to this issue. One is the action itself and then the response. When it comes to this action, it's the burning of any religious book in the name of freedom of expression or freedom of speech. It is a hate crime, and most of the civilized world they know it. And this is what I think that we need to tell the world as well, that yes, the freedom of speech it is important, but burning of a holy book, that is not freedom of speech. That is actually a provocation against the community, which is a criminal act. And when the West says to us that this is legal, I mean, in their laws, but the thing is that everything that is not legal is not right. It's not appropriate. And in this respect, what has been going on in the West that is not acceptable to us in any way. And if something of not even the religious book, even we would have done something, just even a novel or some other book, we would have banned it, or we would have, the people would have burned it, or they had stored its copies in some protest. We would have been labeled as a country where the democracy is at the backslide, and they might have added a new chapter in their religious freedom reports and human rights. So when they have this sort of approach when it comes to us, then the same should be in their case as well. And when it comes to Pakistan, we know that we are always on the forefront when it comes to respect of our religious books, be it our religious book or any other religion book. And Pakistan has been in contact not only with the OIC and the Muslim world, but we have been making efforts internationally at the international forums as well.
Right. How do you analyze this approach of the leadership of the European countries when we talk about Sweden and Denmark in particular? We've seen statements coming from the leadership deploring and condemning these acts, but haven't seen them taking any substantial action against the people who are involved in these vile acts. What does that depict actually about the approach of the leadership of these countries?
Yes, this is, the very meek statements. If you see the statements coming from them, they on the one hand they say that this is not something that should be happening, but at the same time they also, I mean, they in a way it seems that they if they are not complicit, at least they are condoning it. And condoning such acts is, I think, it is also criminal. And when it comes to our sentiments, I mean, the sentiments of the Muslim world, we are not a small community. We are more than 100 billion people on this earth. And, hurting their sentiment in this way, that should not be taken as, as easy as they are taking it.
Right, Mr. Ghauri, please stay with us. I'll come back to you to discuss further things with you also. Ms. Nyla, when we talk about this right of freedom of expression, when we talk about the international instruments, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Article 19.3a of it talks about, it puts certain responsibilities, special duties and responsibilities and certain restrictions as per the law. The subclause of it that happens with the 3a talks about the necessary restrictions for the respect of rights and reputation of others. So it doesn't clearly give a clean chit. So under what pretext or under what banner do you think the authorities over there in Sweden and Denmark talk about freedom of speech and they're unable to stop such of acts?
Basically, I would say there is a lack of political will. Because they have their elections, they have their vote banks, and politicians often take positions which are not necessarily in line with the international norms. You can see it in your eastern neighbor, you can see it in EU certain member countries where it is blatant. You see, Islamophobia is a very deep-rooted phobia in the Western mind since the time of the Ottoman Empire. Although Ottomans were very tolerant and very progressive and very inclusive and very respectful, but if you recall Crusades were basically anti-Islam, and they were basically knights. They glorified them, but they just went and looted, and they took a lot of treasures wherever they went. So in the name of crusades, they committed such atrocities. Why does the world still remember Salahuddin Ayyubi? Because he was a Muslim and he was tolerant, and he said that we will not treat your people like you had treated ours. So for West, for once it was a shock that Muslims can and are more respectful and more tolerant of others. So Salahuddin Ayyubi really set the stage for positive image of Islam. But that deep-rooted underlying hatred has simmered over the centuries, and it keeps on manifesting in different forms. No matter how civilized they may claim to be, their deeds and their words have a gap. They have to review it seriously, because if there is this gap, this will create more instability in the world. So whether you speak of clash of civilizations, or you speak of all these concepts that have been conjuring since last 2 centuries, one resolution is not going to change it, but at least it's the first step forward.
So there are back-to-back efforts done by Pakistan. Earlier we saw Pakistani authorities getting the International Day to Combat Islamophobia also.
Yes, 15th of March.
15th of March. Now United Nations Human Rights Council also passing a resolution. So it's a series of strides which are being taken.
Yes,
spearheaded by
that's
Pakistan,
the
of
first
course.
step, as I said, but this is the drop in the ocean. If you look at 2 centuries of the undercurrents that have been flowing, particularly in the West. So it's a very positive step, but I think we should be realistic that these incidents will continue to take place.
If those continue to take place,
time.
so what is going to be the option at the hands of Muslim countries who will be taking this later
I think
on
we
for the
should
discussion?
continue as we have been working together and taking a uniform position with one voice at the UN, at the OIC, at the Human Rights Council. We are a strong force. We are 57 countries. That's not a small number when it comes to the
Right,
UN.
I'll come to this point later in the show. We're joined by Dr. Sarwat once again. Dr. Sarwat, the adoption of this resolution presented by Pakistan, how significant do you think this one is? What does it depict about Pakistan's leading role, also leading the Muslim world by front in shaking the conscience of the international community? How far-reaching impact do you think it might have in future?
Thank you so much for having me. I think it is a very wise decision because there are two platforms available. One is OIC, and that is rightly pointed out by Ambassador Nyla Chohan Sahiba. And the other one is United Nations, and we can see that countries are united, and this united action is direly needed. And as far as the other point was concerned, that this practice would not stop, and these are very handful people. We should not consider that governments or the entire country is involved in it, because we can see these trends in all over the Europe. Europe itself is fragmented, and there are different movements going on against these rituals, which different. This is not merely they are raising against Islam, but they are even fragmented in terms of religion, in terms of their beliefs. So keeping in view all these trends, I think that this is the wise decision instead of such kind of violent, to curb these violent behaviors, and to stop this escalation of this mindset that there are chances of more violence. So I think that such kind of platforms can be utilized, because in this way we can effectively convey our sentiments, our voices at the right places, and in this way we can persuade these leaders, those who are actually involved for their own popularity in such kind of heinous crimes, because Ambassador Naela has rightly pointed out that there may be some political elements behind it. So in that perspective, I think that this was the right decision of Pakistan.
Right, Dr. Sarwat, when you talk about the statements that came from earlier, we saw from the Swedish authorities, how do you look at those? They've already deplored it, yet we don't find them taking any substantial action against the people involved in these violent acts.
This is just because of their local laws, because at international level one can see that there are some groups and there are laws available which are prohibiting that this is not coming into the freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But when we look at particularly on Sweden and Denmark, so we can find that there are no such laws existing. So in their own perspective, whatever the government is doing, they are just, because back in 19th century one can see that these laws were there. But now these laws like Islamophobia and then blasphemy, it is not considered a crime over there. So in that perspective one can see, and one can also understand that these are those countries which are opening their borders for the migrants, and when they go into these countries, so for the sake of asylum, sometimes such kind of actions are direly needed for just to fulfill the individual interests instead of the collective interests. So to my mind, this is something which is not done by a large group of people. But yes, this is wrong, and one can see that government is still quiet, which should not be, because there would definitely be very serious outcomes for these countries, and government should introduce such kind of laws in their country, so that one can easily see the difference in freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and then the blasphemy or some other heinous crimes which they are doing by adopting such kind of gestures or burning different holy or sacred books.
So what is that international law provide us regarding this when it comes to the special duties and responsibilities and certain restrictions as per the law when it comes to the respect of rights and reputations of others, specifically when we talk about the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights?
Yeah, see, international law is just like a guiding line which a country can take or can even avoid. So countries can turn their eyes off in such cases where their national laws are more strong, and they, on the name of such, because even you can see that some other countries like US was quite over this issue. So there are different stances. I mean, all the countries are not on the same line of thinking where we are standing today. So these countries, one can easily see that they talk about diversity and inclusion all the time. But when it comes into practice, so we can easily identify that there is a gap existing, and they are unable to remove this blurred line that this doesn't come into the freedom of expression either, or freedom of speech. So international law, one can easily turn its eye on when it comes international law. So I think that international law itself is a kind of helpless here, and one can just condemn it. So here I would also like to bring one very important thesis, that is clash of civilization. That was even when everybody was celebrating this democracy and enchanting that kind of slogans that now there would be peace and harmony all over the world. Then with this, there were some other arguments started to emerge, particularly this clash of civilization, when it was pointed out that in future there would be such wars, and this social contact is the one basic reason, because more there is a fast communication, more there is interconnectedness, then there are more chances of such kind of incidents even in future.
Right, Dr. Sarwat, please stay with us. Let me go back to Mr. Irfan Ghauri. Mr. Ghauri, the kind of approach that we have already been discussing of the leadership in these countries with these back-to-back incidents had been happening, do you think they don't have that realization of the possible fallout of these heinous crimes?
I think this is yes, one is the realization, because in different culture, different societies. I mean, in West, it is very common that they make even mockery of Jesus Christ. This is very common for them, but they don't understand that the Muslims, for them, Qur'an Pak, and when it comes to Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we are not, we won't be tolerant at all on such things. We have the limit. But at the same time, participants, they have very eloquently described different options available. I think one of the options that needs concerted effort is what Qur'an Pak itself, itself done when at the time of Nabi Kareem, when the people they objected, they made mockery of Qur'an Pak and its ayat and Nabi Kareem. The Quran is full of giving them answers to their whatever their questions were, and they were with the reasoning, and that is what we should be doing. That whatever the objections, whatever there would be any question, we need to give. We have to be wise enough. The reactionary approach that we adopt, like what we have seen in Iran, the way the people have reacted to that, I think that is not the rational approach. And in many cases, we have seen in our country, the people they become violent, and the violence is not the answer. That actually it fulfills the designs of those people that have been doing all these acts. And mentioned here, sometimes these actions that have been taken, they are not only the religious motive. Sometimes they have political motives as well. Like I tell you, in Sweden, I mean, it's not new in Sweden that this has happened, but recently, when you see the recent history of last few months, in January this year, I mean, there was a protest against. There was a protest in outside the Turkish embassy, and where they burned the Quran, and they desecrated the Quran, and we know that in Sweden, though majority of the people they want to join NATO, I think 65, 64%, but there are 20, 21% such people who do not want to join that. And what happened at that time was that the talks between Sweden and Turkey. They were called off because Turkey reacted to that, and and similarly, I mean, this man that Dr. Saba has mentioned, I mean, that Iraqi man, he wants to have asylum in Sweden, and it seems that he might have this thing in mind that if he does something, such atrocious, it might help him to get asylum. So there are many aspects to that. Similarly, there are many other political parties over there that side their vote bank sides on anti-Muslim sentiments or anti-immigrant sentiments. When we say anti-immigrant, it's mostly the anti-Muslim. And that is what I mean has been mentioned here in our eastern neighbor, that the type of politics that the ruling party over there is doing. That is, whenever their elections come or something comes, they have these anti-Muslim, politics that brings them the votes. So this is the case in many right-wing political parties in Europe as well.
Well, you say a journalist, thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Ms. Naela, when we talk about a statement and a condemnation that came earlier from Pope Francis, how significant that was? And do you think the European leadership has learned anything from that?
Well, the statement from the Pope was very important because it made, I hope, the Christians of the world understand that this is not Christianity either, although we were talking about crusades and we are talking about all the things. Even George Bush Jr., when he started this venture in Iraq and in Afghanistan, he said this was a crusade. He used the word crusade. But Pope's statement rejected it in implication. It rejected in implication that this is not what Christianity calls for, because if you look at how peaceful Jesus was and how caring he was for humanity, then how can his followers be so violent and intolerant of others? So it is self-defeating argument when it comes to them. But what Dr. Ghauri and Dr. Sitwat said are very important points also, that in our expression of anguish, we should not become violent in our own countries, because we are not doing anything to them. What we are doing is burning our own cars and buses and houses and shops, and we are hurting our own people. So this kind of protest is self-defeating. It actually further strengthens such elements who deliberately do cartoons or sacrilege of Quran or the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or it encourages them. They enjoy it. So we should not give them that opportunity. Muslims, we are very respectful, but we should also control our emotions, because even in Quran it is written that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that your job was to convey the message. Whether they accept it or not, it's my job. So you leave it to Allah. Whatever they do, everybody, all our deeds, we are accountable for. If we become violent in our own countries and create destruction, it's not going to help us or stop them, rather it will encourage them. So going at international platforms like the UN, like the Human Rights Council, like OIC, these should be the platforms where the Muslims should be together with one voice. But in our own homes, we shouldn't start burning our homes because of our anger and frustration.
Right, Dr. Sarwat, now the statement and the condemnation that came from Pope Francis also, we earlier saw Pakistan's Prime Minister saying that there is a provocation, a conspiracy behind this to create division between Muslims and Christians after that particular statement that came from the Pope. That particular conspiracy which was being hashed, it was a huge blow to that one, that particular condemnation by the Pope itself. What's your understanding of that?
Well, I believe that this statement is very important in this situation. And as far as the 25% population of the world is concerned, like Muslims, I think our unified action would be enough after taking such kind of decisions and utilizing these platforms. It would definitely be conveying a message, and this statement is also important for us because it shows that all the European countries are not alike, and this should not be taken as that this came from the entire Europe. Rather, we can take it as a kind of issue which can only be solved through negotiations and by utilizing some table where we can discuss that how to come out of it. Otherwise, there would be repetition, and I'm afraid that if this would happen again, it would definitely be having very serious repercussions for the Nordic states from where these statements are usually coming.
So, what possible repercussions? Don't you think there should be a realization among the European authorities in particular when it comes to gauging the very sensitivity associated with this matter?
I think that they are not oblivious. They were already knowing it because when you look back at the history of these countries, we saw that even at the time of the Treaty of Westphalia, there was a commotion within these societies, and these were those states which were even staging protest against the different religions even at that time, and then they reached on one point, that was the formation of nation-state system. But keeping in view their background, I think they know the consequences as well. But as far as the countries, I mean, what are the possibilities, what repercussions would be there? Like countries, there would be some economic sanctions together. But for that purpose, there should be a strength within Muslim Ummah. I mean, this would not be happening without bringing a change in our own action. It should be very persuasive in a way that it can attract other world, because I think just using words and abusing someone, this would not be enough. This should happen through actions, because we are the follower of Prophet, peace be upon him, and we know that his life was full of such examples when people were abusing, and we know the actions, and later they all accepted and embraced Islam. So this is the way, like through actions we can persuade world leaders that there is a difference between radicalization and the basic principles of Islam, and this is we all need to do together.
Professor Dr. Sarwat, Rauf, expert foreign affairs, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. In the studio, we were joined by Ms. Nyla Chohan, former ambassador. Thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, we can conclude that it happens to be the responsibility of the major powers and the international community in order to bring in the preventive legal deterrence regarding the happening of such vile acts, which are aimed at hurting the sentiments of around 2 billion Muslims worldwide. And that happens to be really crucial in order to avoid the serious repercussions of such vile acts. So with that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.